March 1945. 60 German women stood in four lines outside a white building in Mississippi. The morning mist clung to the barbed wire fences like cotton, softening the edges of their captivity, but not its reality. A guard raised his hand. The women held their breath waiting. Then Sergeant Thomas Crawford said 5 words that made their blood run cold. "Close your eyes and don't scream." The words hung in the humid air like smoke from a distant fire. Several women gasped. One young girl, barely 19 years old, began to cry quietly, her shoulders shaking with the effort of keeping silent. Hands reached out and gripped other hands, fingers squeezing so tight that knuckles turned white against gray fabric. Some women began to pray their whispered words, tumbling out in desperate German. Vater unser, der du bist im Himmel. The Lord's Prayer from childhood, from a time before the world had burned itself to ash. They had heard the stories. Every prisoner had heard the stories. Medical experiments on captured soldiers. Torture disguised as treatment. The Russians, they said, had done unspeakable things to German prisoners. The Americans' Nazi propaganda had warned them would be even worse. Barbaric, cruel. They would experiment on prisoners like animals, test new weapons on defenseless captives, commit atrocities that would make the Eastern Front look merciful by comparison. Now it was their turn. The medical building stood at the edge of the compound, a long wooden structure painted brilliant white with a red cross painted on its side. It looked clean, too clean. That frightened them more than bloodstains would have. After years of bombed hospitals and makeshift field stations, after years of buildings that smelled of gangrene and death and desperate suffering, this pristine whiteness felt wrong. Threatening, the windows sparkled in the weak morning sun. The door opened and closed smoothly on oiled hinges. Everything about it suggested order and professionalism, and somehow that made the terror worse. In the front row, a woman named Clara Schneider stood very still. She was 26 years old, though the war had aged her beyond her years. Her face still carried the marks of the journey across the Atlantic. Dark circles under eyes that had seen too much. Cheeks that were starting to fill out after 3 weeks of regular American meals, but still showed the hollow look of wartime hunger. Hair that was clean now, but cut short in the practical style of women who had learned that beauty meant nothing when survival meant everything. Clara had been a nurse. 3 years in German field hospitals had taught her things no person should ever learn. She knew what doctors could do with their knowledge when they chose to cause pain instead of healing. She knew the sound a 17-year-old boy made when his leg was amputated without enough anesthetic. She knew the smell of infection spreading through tissue, killing a young soldier inch by inch, because there were no more antibiotics left in all of Germany. She knew how it felt to hold someone's hand as they died, to be the last human comfort they would ever know. She thought she had seen the worst that war could offer. Standing in that misty morning outside the white medical building in Mississippi, she realized she had been wrong. The worst was not death. The worst was not knowing what would happen next. The building's door remained closed. Behind it, 3 American doctors waited. Clara could not see them, but she imagined them preparing instruments, laying out whatever tools they would use for whatever they planned to do. Her mind conjured images from the propaganda films she had been forced to watch. Americans as monsters in white coats. Americans as torturers who smiled while they worked. Americans as everything evil the Reich had fought against. A bird sang in one of the pine trees that surrounded the camp. Somewhere in the distance, a truck engine rumbled to life. These ordinary sounds made the moment feel surreal, as if the world could not possibly continue its normal business while something terrible was about to happen. How could birds sing? How could engines turn over? How could the sun continue to rise when they were about to face horror? Clara forced herself to breathe slowly. She had learned this technique during her nursing training back when she was 19, and full of idealism about helping people and saving lives. That seemed like another lifetime now, another world entirely. The Clara who had walked into nursing school in Hamburg in 1938 would not have recognized the woman standing in this prison camp in Mississippi in 1945. She thought about Hamburg, about the last time she had worked in a hospital there in the winter of 1940. The building had been hit by bombs twice already. Half the roof was gone. They performed surgeries by candlelight when the generators failed, which was often. They had run out of morphine months earlier. Soldiers bit down on leather straps while doctors cut into their flesh. Some died from the shock of pain before the surgery could save them. One boy in particular haunted her memory. He could not have been older than 17, though his paper said 18. Everyone lied about ages by then. He had been shot through the stomach, the bullet tearing through organs and leaving infection in its wake. Without antibiotics, death was certain. It was just a matter of time and suffering. Clara had held his hand for 6 hours as he died. He had cried for his mother. He had asked Clara to tell his family he had been brave. She had promised she would know, and she had no way to find them, no way to deliver such a message in the chaos of collapsing Germany. When he finally died, she had felt something inside herself die too. Some small part of her that still believed in the possibility of good things in the world. Now standing outside this white building, she wondered if that was what awaited them. Not the quick death of a bullet, but the slow death of medical torture. Pain without purpose. Suffering without end. The minutes crawled past like wounded things. The sun climbed higher in the sky, burning off the morning mist. The pine trees stopped dripping moisture. The barbed wire fences became clear and sharp again, no longer softened by fog. Guard towers loomed at the corners of the camp, and Clara could see the silhouettes of American soldiers watching through binoculars, observing, recording, waiting. Her hands had clenched into fists without her realizing it, fingernails digging into her palms hard enough to leave marks. She forced herself to relax them, to shake out the tension, to remember her training. A nurse should be calm in crisis. A nurse should be professional even in fear. The habits of her former life tried to assert themselves, but they felt hollow now, like following the rules of a game that no longer existed. Next to her stood Maria Weber, 30 years old, a secretary from Munich. Maria had a practical mind and a calm demeanor that the other women found reassuring. She worked as a typist for a Wehrmacht supply office before her capture, spending her days documenting shipments of ammunition and food rations that grew smaller with every passing month. She had seen the numbers that told the real story of the war, the story that propaganda concealed. Germany was losing. Germany had been losing for a long time. Behind Clara, a young woman named Ingrid Koch trembled visibly. At 19, she was the youngest among them. She had operated radio equipment at a listening station in France, copying down Allied communications in her neat handwriting. The work had seemed important at the time, part of the great struggle. Now it felt pointless. Everything felt pointless. An older woman named Christina Muller stood in the back row, her face set in hard lines. At 42, she had worked as a clerk in military intelligence. She had seen classified reports, had typed up documents marked secret and urgent. She knew more than most about what Germany had done about the camps and the killings and the systematic cruelty. But she had also believed in the mission, believed that Germany was fighting for its survival against enemies who wanted to destroy it utterly. Even now, even here, she held on to that belief. It was all she had left. These women had come from different cities, different lives, different circumstances. But they shared this moment of absolute terror, standing in formation outside a building that might contain their deaths. They had survived the war in Europe. They had survived the capture and the journey across the Atlantic. They had survived 3 weeks in this American camp that was cleaner and better supplied than any place they had seen in Germany for the past 2 years. But would they survive what waited behind that white door? If this story grabs your attention, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible World War II stories that you won't find anywhere else. What you are about to hear is one of the most powerful true accounts of how unexpected kindness can change everything we believe about our enemies. The journey these women took from terror to transformation will show you something profound about what America truly means. Stay with us through this story, because by the end, you will understand why mercy can be the most powerful weapon of all. Camp Clinton sat in the flat, humid Mississippi countryside surrounded by pine forests that stretched to the horizon. The camp had been built quickly in 1943 to house prisoners of war, part of the massive system that would eventually hold more than 400,000 German POWs on American soil. The barracks were simple but solid wooden buildings with real roofs and doors that closed properly. The mess hall served regular meals. The infirmary had medicine and clean bandages. By the standards of wartime prison camps, it was almost comfortable. The women had arrived 3 weeks earlier, captured in Europe during the final chaotic months of the war. They had expected death. They had been told by their officers that capture meant torture and execution. Nazi propaganda had painted Americans as barbaric gangsters, as a weak and decadent people who could not possibly understand honor or civilization. The propaganda had promised that American treatment of prisoners would be unthinkably cruel. Instead, they had been given clean barracks, regular meals, no beatings, no torture, no execution. Just captivity in a camp that was better maintained than many German military facilities had been toward the end. The cognitive dissonance had started immediately. How could the barbaric Americans provide better conditions than the civilized Germans? It made no sense according to everything they had been taught. But the medical building remained an unknown. They had not been inside it yet. This morning was their first scheduled examination. And the command from Sergeant Crawford, "Close your eyes and don't scream," had brought all their fears rushing back. Perhaps this was where the real horror would begin. Perhaps the kindness of the past 3 weeks had been designed to lower their guard before the true cruelty started. The door opened. Sergeant Crawford emerged, his middle-aged face showing neither cruelty nor kindness, just professional neutrality. He carried a clipboard and called out a name in carefully pronounced German. Maria Weber. Maria went rigid. Her practical mind tried to calculate odds, to think through scenarios, but fear overwhelmed logic. Women on either side of her had to gently push her forward when she froze. Her legs moved mechanically, carrying her toward the door like a prisoner walking to execution. The door closed behind her. Silence fell over the compound. The remaining women strained their ears, listening desperately for any sound from inside the building. Screams, cries for help, anything that would tell them what was happening. But they heard nothing, just silence. Long, terrible silence that seemed to stretch forever. 1 minute passed, then 5, then 10. The silence became unbearable. Some women began to cry, convinced that Maria had been killed so quickly and efficiently that they had not even heard her die. Others stood rigid, refusing to show emotion, determined to face their fate with whatever dignity they could manage. Clara felt her heart hammering against her ribs. Nurses' training told her to control her breathing, but her body refused to cooperate. 15 minutes after she had entered, the door opened again. Maria walked out. She was alive. She was not bleeding. She was not crying. Her clothes were not torn. There were no visible marks on her body. Her face showed an expression that the other women could not immediately identify because it was so unexpected. She looked confused, bewildered, but not hurt. Maria walked past the line of waiting women without speaking. Her mouth opened and closed several times as if she wanted to say something, but no words came out. She seemed to be in shock, but not the kind of shock that comes from pain or trauma. It was the shock of disbelief, the shock of having every expectation turned completely upside down. The women stared at her, trying to read meaning in her expression, trying to understand what had happened inside that building. But Maria just shook her head slowly and kept walking toward the barracks, her steps uncertain, like someone who had just witnessed something impossible. Sergeant Crawford checked his clipboard again and called another name, then another. Each woman went through the same journey, terror walking toward the door closing, long minutes of silence, the door opening, the woman emerging alive, unharmed, and utterly confused. After the 5th woman came out with the same bewildered expression, Clara began to understand that something very strange was happening. Whatever was inside that building, it was not what they had been prepared for. But that only made the fear more complex. If it was not torture, then what was it? What could cause that look of complete cognitive dissonance? Finally, Crawford called her name. Clara Schneider. Clara stepped forward. Her nurse's training asserted itself automatically. Stand up straight, keep your face neutral. Do not show fear, even when you feel it coursing through every nerve. She walked toward the white door with measured steps, refusing to let her legs betray her terror. She glanced back once at the remaining women. Their faces were tight with fear and questions. Then she stepped inside and the door closed behind her with a soft click. The interior of the medical building was unlike anything Clara had seen in years. The floors were clean, actually clean, not just swept, but washed and polished until they gleamed. The walls were painted white and showed no signs of blood or dirt or the brown stains that came from years of desperate medical work. Bright electric lights hung from the ceiling, powered by a generator that hummed quietly somewhere in the building. After years of bombed hospitals and candlelit operating rooms, the brightness was almost painful. The room contained 3 examination tables with clean white sheets. Metal cabinets lined one wall, their doors closed, hiding their contents. A desk sat in one corner with neat stacks of papers and files. Everything was organized. Everything was in its place. For a prison camp medical facility, it looked impossibly professional. 3 American doctors stood waiting. The oldest one, a man in his 50s with gray hair and gentle eyes, stepped forward. He spoke in English, and Sergeant Crawford, who had followed Clara inside, translated into German. "Good morning. I am Dr. James Bennett. This is Dr. Chen and Dr. Rodriguez. We are here to perform a medical examination. We will check your overall health, take your temperature and blood pressure, look at your teeth and throat, and listen to your heart and lungs. We will also check for any signs of malnutrition or a disease that need treatment. Do you understand?" Clara nodded slowly. Her mind was trying to process what she had just heard. A medical examination. Just a regular medical examination. Not experiments, not torture. She did not trust it. This had to be a trick, a way to lower her guard before the real horror began. Dr. Bennett seemed to sense her fear. He spoke again, his voice calm and steady, waiting for Crawford to translate. "We are not here to hurt you. We are here to help you. I know you are afraid. I know you have heard stories about what might happen to you. But I promise you on my honor as a physician that we will not harm you. We will only examine you to make sure you are healthy." Clara wanted to believe him. The words were kind. His face seemed sincere. But belief required trust, and trust had died somewhere in the ruins of Europe. She stood very still as Dr. Bennett approached her with a stethoscope. The cold metal pressed against her chest through the thin fabric of her gray dress. She closed her eyes, waiting for pain, waiting for the trick to be revealed, waiting for the moment when kindness would transform into cruelty. But there was no pain, just the doctor's voice translated by Crawford asking her to breathe deeply, in and out, again, again. The stethoscope moved to her back. Breathe deeply, in and out. Dr. Chen, a younger man with Asian features and careful movements, stepped forward with a small flashlight. "I am going to look at your eyes now. Please look straight ahead." The light was bright but not painful. He examined one eye, then the other, his movements gentle and professional. He made notes on a clipboard. Dr. Rodriguez, a woman in her 30s with dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, checked Clara's temperature with a thermometer. She felt along Clara's neck, checking for swollen glands. She looked in her ears with an otoscope. Every movement was careful, clinical, professional, not cruel. As the examination continued, Dr. Bennett's face grew more serious. He pressed his stethoscope against Clara's back and asked her to breathe deeply. She did. He listened for a long moment, then moved the stethoscope to another spot. Again. His frown deepened. Clara's heart began to race. She knew that frown. She had worn it herself when examining patients in Hamburg. It was the expression of a medical professional who had found something wrong, something potentially serious. Her mind jumped to terrible possibilities. Tuberculosis, pneumonia, cancer. After years of poor nutrition and stress, any of these were possible. After years of breathing smoke from burning buildings and sleeping in cold rooms and working herself past exhaustion, her lungs could have been damaged in ways she had ignored because there was no choice but to ignore them. Dr. Bennett stepped back and spoke to the other doctors in English. They exchanged words Clara could not understand, but she could read their body language. Something was wrong, something in her lungs, in her. Something serious enough to make experienced doctors confer with each other. The old fear came flooding back. This was it. They had found something. Some excuse to do whatever terrible things they had planned. Some justification for experiments, or cruelty, or whatever awaited prisoners who were sick. Dr. Chen stepped forward with a blood pressure cuff. Clara had used them before in her nursing work. He wrapped it around her arm and pumped the rubber bulb. The cuff tightened, then slowly released. He read the gauge and made a note. His expression gave nothing away. Dr. Rodriguez examined Clara's hands, turning them over, looking at her fingernails. She pressed on the nail beds and watched how quickly the color returned. Another test Clara recognized. Checking for circulation, looking for signs of anemia. The thoroughness of the examination was almost frightening. These doctors were not performing a cursory check. They were conducting a complete medical evaluation. They were taking it seriously. They were treating her like a patient who mattered, like a human being whose health was important. Dr. Bennett turned to her. Through Crawford's translation, he said something that would shatter every remaining certainty Clara held about her enemies. You have fluid in your lungs. It is not severe yet, but it could become serious if left untreated. You also show signs of malnutrition, though you are improving. Your blood pressure is slightly low. Do you have a cough? Clara nodded. She had been coughing for weeks, but she had ignored it. Everyone coughed in the winter. Everyone was tired. Everyone felt weak. That was just life during war. You pushed through it. You did not complain. You certainly did not admit weakness to your captors. We are going to treat you. The words hung in the air. Clara stared at Dr. Bennett, unable to process what she had just heard. Treat her. The enemy was going to treat her. You will receive antibiotics. This is medicine that will help your body fight the infection in your lungs. You will also receive vitamin supplements to help with the malnutrition. We want you to return here every day for the next week so we can monitor your progress. Do you understand? Clara understood the words, but she could not make them mean what they seemed to mean. Treatment, medicine, monitoring her progress. This was not how you treated enemy prisoners. This was how you treated patients. Human beings who deserve care and healing. Dr. Rodriguez opened one of the metal cabinets. Inside were rows of medicine bottles, bandages, syringes, and other medical supplies. All of it clean, all of it organized, all of it available. She took out a bottle of pills and counted several into a small paper envelope. She handed it to Clara with instructions translated carefully by Sergeant Crawford. Take one pill 3 times a day, after breakfast, after lunch, and after dinner. Do not skip any doses. The medicine will make you feel better, but you must take all of it even after you start feeling better. If you stop too soon, the infection can come back stronger. Do you understand? Clara took the envelope. Her hands shook, not from fear this time, but from shock. She looked down at the pills through the paper. Real medicine, antibiotics. In Germany, such medicine had become rarer than gold by the end of the war. Soldiers died from infections that could have been cured with a few pills. Children died from diseases that medicine could have prevented. And here the enemy was giving it to her. A prisoner, a German, someone who had been part of the machine that tried to destroy them. You can go now, Dr. Bennett said. Send in the next woman, and please tell them not to be afraid. We are here to help, not to hurt. Clara walked out of the building in a daze. The morning mist had burned off completely. Weak sunlight filtered through the pine trees. The line of women turned to look at her, their faces tight with fear and desperate questions. She walked past them, her mind still trying to process what had just happened. Maria appeared at her elbow, the woman who had gone in first. Now Clara understood the confused look on her face. Now she understood the bewilderment. Now she knew what it felt like to have every expectation shattered so completely that you could not even form words to describe it. Maria whispered, "They examined you. They did not hurt you." Clara shook her head slowly. "No, they did not hurt me. They found an infection in my lungs. They gave me medicine." Medicine, Maria's voice rose in disbelief. "Real medicine, antibiotics," Clara said. She held up the paper envelope as proof. "For my lungs. They said I have fluid in my lungs and need treatment." The two women stood in silence looking at each other. Around them, more women came out of the medical building. Each one wore the same expression of shock and confusion. Each one carried something. Pills, vitamin bottles. In one case, a bottle of cough syrup. One woman had a bandage on her arm where the doctors had treated an infected cut. Clara looked down at the envelope in her hand. Inside were pills that could save her life. Pills that had been given to her by the enemy. By the Americans who were supposed to be monsters, but who had instead shown her something she could barely comprehend. Mercy. The days that followed brought a routine that felt like stepping into an alternate reality. Every morning after breakfast, women who needed medical treatment would line up outside the white building. The fear that had gripped them that first morning slowly faded, replaced by something harder to name. Not trust, not yet, but at least the certainty that they would not be tortured. Clara returned each day as instructed. Each time Dr. Bennett or one of the other physicians would examine her. They listened to her lungs with the stethoscope, moving it carefully across her back and chest. They checked her temperature with the glass thermometer, waiting patiently for it to register. They asked about her cough. Was it better or worse? The same. She watched them work with the careful attention of a trained nurse still looking for signs of deception or hidden cruelty. She found none. The doctors maintained detailed records. Each visit was documented. Temperatures were recorded in neat charts. Notes were made about the progression or regression of symptoms. This level of care was what Clara had been taught in nursing school back in Hamburg, but had rarely seen practiced in the chaos of wartime Germany. Within 3 days, Clara's cough began to improve. The pain in her chest when she breathed deeply started to fade. She had more energy. She slept better at night without waking to coughing fits. Her body was healing perhaps for the first time in years. She could feel the difference in how she woke up in the morning. The heavy tiredness that had plagued her for months was lifting, like fog burning off in sunlight. Other women experienced similar transformations. Ingrid, the young radio operator, had been suffering from anemia that made her dizzy and weak. The doctors gave her iron supplements and made sure she received extra portions of meat and vegetables with her meals. Within 2 weeks, the dark circles under her eyes had faded. She no longer felt faint when she stood up too quickly. Color returned to her cheeks. Sophie, the typist from Berlin, had developed a painful tooth infection that kept her awake at night. The camp dentist, an older American captain, with steady hands, in a gentle manner, extracted the bad tooth and gave her pain medication. He worked with such care, explaining each step through the translator, that Sophie cried afterward. Not from pain, but from the unexpected kindness of a man who could have been rough and careless, but chose not to be. The medical staff also conducted preventive care. They vaccinated the women against diseases common in the American South. Typhoid, tetanus, diphtheria. They provided treatment for parasites that many of the women had picked up during their journey from Europe. They conducted eye exams and provided glasses to those who needed them. They even treated minor complaints like athlete's foot and dry skin ailments that seemed trivial compared to wartime suffering, but that the Americans took seriously nonetheless. But physical healing brought psychological pain. The better the women felt, the more guilty they became. How could they be healthy when their families were suffering? How could they eat well when letters from home described hunger? How could they sleep in clean beds when their mothers and sisters lived in bombed cellars 3 weeks into their stay at Camp Clinton, just as the women were settling into the rhythm of medical appointments and regular meals? Sergeant Crawford made an announcement that would change everything. He stood before the assembled women at morning roll call, his weathered face showing neither approval nor disapproval, just that same professional neutrality. Tomorrow morning, he said in his grandmother's careful German, "You will have a special American breakfast, real American food." The women looked at each other with fear creeping back into their eyes. What did that mean? What was American food? Nazi propaganda had told them that Americans had no real cuisine, that they ate only canned goods and processed foods, that their meals were tasteless and industrial. Propaganda films had shown Americans as people without culture, without tradition, without the refined taste that Europeans possessed. That night in the barracks, the women discussed what American breakfast might entail. Christina, the older woman from military intelligence, who still clung to her beliefs about German superiority, warned them darkly. It could be poisoned, or food so terrible it is meant as punishment. Perhaps they will force us to eat things that will make us sick. Clara remembered Hamburg in the winter of 1904. Breakfast had meant watery soup, if you were lucky, sometimes a piece of moldy bread if supplies had come through. Coffee made from burnt barley, because real coffee had disappeared years earlier. Her mother had saved her own rations, pushing them toward Clara and her younger sister, Annalisa, insisting she was not hungry even when her hands shook from weakness. The memory brought a sharp pain to Clara's chest that had nothing to do with the lung infection. Annalise, 22 years old, working in a munitions factory because all able-bodied women had been conscripted for war work. Clara had not heard from her in months. The last letter received just before Clara's capture had been brief and carefully worded to pass the censors. "I am well. I miss you. Mother sends her love. Come home soon." Clara wondered if Annalise was still alive, if the factory had been bombed, if she had enough to eat, if she was warm, if she thought about her older sister captured by the enemy, probably dead. The uncertainty was a constant ache. None of these German women knew that the next morning's breakfast would become the moment they remembered for the rest of their lives. The moment when everything they had been told about America would fall apart like wet paper. The mess hall the next morning looked the same as always. Long wooden tables arranged in neat rows, American flag on the wall, windows that let in the early light. But the smell that filled the room was different. It was a smell that stopped the women in their tracks as they entered. Rich, fatty, smoky, complex. It was a smell they had not encountered in years, a smell from before the war. A smell that triggered memories so powerful that several women stopped walking, their eyes going wide, their breath catching in their throats. On the tables waited plates of food that looked like they had been conjured from memory or dream. Thick-cut bacon still sizzling slightly, the strips curled at the edges. Fresh eggs fried until the whites were set, but the yolks still liquid and golden. White bread toast with real butter, not the margarine that had replaced it in Germany years ago. Coffee, real coffee, steam rising from ceramic mugs, the aroma rich and bitter and absolutely authentic. Orange juice in glass cups, the liquid bright and impossibly fresh. And small stacks of pancakes with a dark syrup that smelled of sweetness and trees. The women stood frozen, staring at the food. Clara felt her throat tighten. This was not possible. This could not be real. Germany had not seen food like this since before the war began. Even before the war, a breakfast this abundant would have been reserved for special occasions. Christmas morning, Easter Sunday, someone's wedding day. The bacon smell was almost violent in its intensity. It hit Clara like a physical force, triggering memories she had tried to bury. Sunday mornings in her grandmother's kitchen in 1938, when she was 19 and the world had not ended yet. The sizzle of pork in the pan, her grandmother humming while she cooked. The windows open to let in summer air. Everything normal, everything safe, everything lost. Maria stood next to Clara, staring at the bacon strips on the plate before her. The fat was translucent and golden. The edges were crispy and dark. It looked exactly like bacon was supposed to look, and that simple fact was devastating because it meant this was real. This abundance was real. America had not just enough food to feed its people, but enough to give bacon and eggs to prisoners, to enemies. No one moved. No one reached for the food. They were afraid to touch it, afraid that touching it would reveal it as illusion, or afraid that it was real and that eating it would mean accepting something too large to comprehend. Sergeant Crawford stood near the door watching. His face showed no emotion, but Clara thought she detected something in his eyes. Not pity exactly, perhaps sadness, perhaps understanding of what this moment meant. Maria was the first to move. Her practical mind overcame her fear. She reached out slowly and picked up a strip of bacon. Her fingers touched the warm meat. It was real, solid, actual food. She brought it to her mouth and bit down. Her eyes closed. Her whole body went still. Then tears started rolling down her cheeks, cutting tracks through skin that had not seen tears from anything but grief and fear for so long that joy had become a foreign emotion. She was not crying from sadness. She was crying because the bacon tasted exactly like bacon should taste. Salt and smoke and richness and fat. It tasted like food was supposed to taste when the world was not burning. It tasted like memory and loss and everything that had been taken away. And she had forgotten. She had actually forgotten that food could taste like anything other than survival. The sound of Maria crying unlocked something in the other women. One by one, slowly, carefully, they began to eat. Ingrid picked up a piece of toast. The butter was real butter, yellow and creamy, melting slightly into the warm bread. She bit down and made a small sound, something between a gasp and a sob. In Berlin, she whispered, "We told children that butter was a myth, that it did not exist anymore, that it was just a word from before the war, like so many other words that no longer had meaning." Sophie drank the orange juice. She held the glass with both hands like it was precious, like it might disappear. She took a small sip, then a larger one, then drained the glass. Fresh orange juice, not canned, not reconstituted from powder. Fresh. She had not tasted citrus in 3 years. She had almost forgotten what it tasted like. The sweetness and acidity and brightness. She held the empty cup and stared into it as if answers might be found at the bottom. Clara looked down at her own plate, at the bacon strips lying there waiting, at the eggs with their bright yellow yolks, at the toast with butter melting into its surface, at the coffee sending up steam. She picked up the bacon with fingers that trembled. She bit down. The taste exploded in her mouth. Salt, smoke, fat, richness. It tasted like her grandmother's kitchen in 1938, when she was 19 and studying nursing, and the world was full of possibility. It tasted like Sunday mornings when her family gathered around the table, and her father read the newspaper, and her mother hummed while she cooked, and Annalise, just 12 years old, then stole extra bacon from the serving plate when she thought no one was looking. It tasted like Christmas and Easter and every good memory from before. It tasted like everything that had been lost. Clara understood something in that moment that shattered what remained of her certainty. The enemy had abundance, real, overwhelming, almost incomprehensible abundance. While Germany starved, while children died from malnutrition, while soldiers performed surgery without anesthesia because there was no medicine left, America had so much that they could give bacon and eggs and butter and coffee and orange juice to prisoners, to enemies, every single morning. The propaganda had lied, all of it. The films showing Americans as weak and decadent, the promises that Germany's discipline and organization would triumph over American chaos, the assurances that America could never match German strength. All lies. America was not weak. America was so strong that it could afford to be generous, so secure that it could afford to be kind. Around the mess hall, women ate and cried. Some cried quietly, tears running down their faces while they chewed. Others sobbed openly, shoulders shaking. A few laughed through their tears, the sound slightly hysterical, the sound of people whose understanding of the world had just been turned inside out. Christina sat at her table, staring at the food but not eating. Her face was hard, her jaw set. She had built her identity on the belief in German superiority, on the certainty that Germany represented civilization fighting against barbarism. This breakfast challenged that belief in a way that words never could. She finally picked up a piece of toast, ate it mechanically, her face showing nothing. But Clara saw her hands shaking. The bacon breakfast lasted less than 30 minutes, but its impact would last lifetimes. When the women filed out of the mess hall, they walked differently, slower, more thoughtful, like people who had just witnessed something that required new categories of understanding. That breakfast broke something inside these women. It broke the last walls of propaganda. It broke the certainty that they were the civilized ones and the Americans were barbarians. It broke the belief that their suffering was unique and meaningful, while American abundance was somehow hollow or false. The breaking hurt. Truth often does. If you served in the military during World War II, or if your father or grandfather did, I would love to hear your story in the comments below. What was your family's experience during this time? Did they ever encounter German or Japanese prisoners of war? Share your memories with us. These stories need to be preserved for future generations. And please hit that subscribe button. We are bringing you true stories from the greatest generation that you will not find anywhere else. Stories about what truly makes America great. Not just military might, but the strength to show mercy even to our enemies. The afternoon brought mail call. Letters from Germany arrived irregularly, usually weeks or months old, having traveled circuitous routes through international postal systems, struggling to function in the chaos of war's end. The women gathered when the mailbags arrived, hoping desperately for any word from home, any confirmation that their families still lived. Clara received a letter. The envelope was worn, the paper thin and cheap, the kind of paper Germany had been using since good paper became another casualty of war. Her mother's handwriting on the front, shaky and uncertain. Clara's hands trembled as she opened it. My dearest Clara. The words swam before her eyes. I hope this letter finds you well. I hope the Americans are treating you with some kindness. I must tell you about your sister. Annalise is very ill. She has a high fever and a terrible cough. She cannot breathe well at night. The doctor says it is pneumonia, but there is no medicine. The hospital has nothing, not even aspirin, not even bandages. She asks for you every day, Clara. She wants you to come home. She is only 22 years old. If you have any medicine there, if there is any way to send it, please. Please try my WWII desperate. Your loving mother. Clara read the letter 3 times, then a fourth. The words refused to make sense because if they made sense, then she would have to face what they meant. Annalise was sick, with pneumonia, the exact same infection Clara had just recovered from. The infection that would have killed Clara if Dr. Bennett had not given her antibiotics. Clara looked down at her own hands. Strong hands, healthy hands, hands that belonged to a body that was healing, that was gaining weight, that was sleeping through nights without coughing. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the small envelope of antibiotic pills. The medicine that had saved her life. The medicine that could save Annalise. But Clara could not send it. International mail did not allow medication. Prison camp regulations did not permit it. Even if she tried, the pills would be confiscated. Her sister would die because Clara had been captured, had become a prisoner, had received the very medicine that was now impossible to share. The unfairness of it was crushing. The cruelty of the situation was not malicious, but systematic, built into rules and regulations that made perfect sense from a military standpoint and no sense at all from a human one. Clara held the cure for her sister's illness in her hand, and it might as well have been on another planet. Other women were reading their own letters. Maria's sister in Dresden wrote about living in a coal cellar after the firebombing. The house is gone. We have 1 pot, 3 spoons in the clothes we wore when the bombs fell. We eat potato peels when we can find them. Yesterday, your little nephew, he is only 8 years old, he fainted from hunger. His ribs show through his skin like he is already a skeleton. I do not know how much longer we can survive like this. Ingrid's mother in Munich described the hospital where she worked. We wash and reuse bandages until they fall apart. We have no morphine for the wounded. They bite on leather straps during surgery. Some die from the shock of pain before we can save them. Doctors work by candlelight because the generators have no fuel. We are trying, Clara. We are trying so hard, but we have nothing left to work with. The letters painted a picture of a Germany that was dying, not just losing the war, but collapsing completely. Infrastructure destroyed, supply chains broken, medical care reduced to medieval standards, people living in ruins, eating garbage, watching their children waste away from hunger and disease. And here in Mississippi, prisoners ate bacon for breakfast, received antibiotics for infections, slept in clean beds with real blankets, had access to doctors and medicine and food and everything that Germany no longer possessed. The guilt became unbearable. Clara walked back to the barracks holding her mother's letter like it was made of glass. She sat on her bunk and read it again and again. Annalise is very ill. She asks for you every day. She is only 22 years old. Clara had saved the boy soldier in Hamburg by holding his hand as he died. She had promised to be brave, to tell his mother he had been brave, but she had not saved him. She had just witnessed his death with what small comfort she could provide. Now her own sister was dying, and Clara could not even witness it, could not hold her hand, could not provide any comfort at all. She had the medicine that could save Annalise, and it sat in her pocket useless. The next morning, Clara brought the letter to her medical appointment. She handed it to Dr. Bennett through Sergeant Crawford's translation. Can I send medicine to my sister? She asked the question, knowing the answer, but needing to ask anyway. Dr. Bennett read the letter carefully. His face showed genuine sympathy, the kind that comes from understanding the full weight of an impossible situation. He was quiet for a long moment before answering. I wish I could help you. I truly do. But there are regulations. The Geneva Conventions govern how prisoners of war must be treated. Those conventions require that we provide you with medical care. But they also have rules about what can be sent from prison camps to enemy territory. Medicine cannot be sent. If we broke these rules, we would lose the moral authority to demand that other nations follow them. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Your sister's suffering is real. I do not doubt that. But the rules we follow are designed to prevent even greater suffering. They are designed to ensure that all prisoners everywhere receive basic humane treatment. If we start making exceptions, no matter how sympathetic, the entire system collapses. Clara understood the logic. She had been trained as a nurse. She understood systems and regulations and the necessity of rules. But understanding the logic did nothing to ease the pain. Nothing to solve the impossible equation of having the cure in her hand while her sister died 1,000 miles away. That afternoon, Clara walked with Sergeant Crawford back toward the barracks. Her English had been improving through daily practice, through conversations with the American guards, who seemed willing to talk if you asked respectfully. She gathered her courage and asked the question that had been burning in her mind since that first breakfast. Why you help us? We are enemy. Crawford was quiet for a long moment. They walked past the pine trees, past the fences, past the guard towers. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that came from hard experience and harder choices. You want to know why we help you? I will tell you why. He stopped walking and turned to face her. My brother Michael died at Normandy, June 6, 1944. He was 23 years old. He wanted to be a teacher. He loved history. He used to read everything he could find about ancient Rome, about medieval Europe, about the American Revolution. He would have been a good teacher. Crawford's voice remained steady, but Clara could hear the grief beneath it. German soldiers killed him. German artillery in the first wave. Soldiers like your husbands, your brothers, your fathers. They killed my baby brother. He died on a beach in France, bleeding into the sand, and I was not there. I could not help him. I could not even say goodbye. Clara felt her throat tighten. She started to speak to apologize, but Crawford held up his hand. After Michael died, I could have requested combat duty. I could have gone to Europe and killed Germans. A lot of men did exactly that. Revenge, justice, whatever you want to call it. Nobody would have blamed me. But my grandmother, she came from Bremen in 1912, before the Great War, before everything went wrong. She used to tell us stories about Germany before the wars, about good people, regular people, farmers and shopkeepers and teachers, people who loved their families and worked hard and tried to live decent lives. She used to say, Tommy, do not ever let hate make you into something you are not. Crawford looked at Clara directly. So I volunteered for prison camp guard duty instead. And you know what? Every morning when I make sure you ladies get your breakfast, every time I translate for the doctors, every time I see one of you getting healthy again, I think about my grandmother. And I think she would be proud. He started walking again and Clara walked beside him. Revenge is easy, Crawford said. Any fool can hate. Any country can be cruel. Any army can torture prisoners. But showing mercy when you have the power to destroy, that takes real strength. That is what makes America different. My son is 15 years old. I do not want him fighting another war in 20 years. So maybe, just maybe, if we treat you right now, if we show you that Americans are better than your propaganda said, then your children and my son can live in peace later. Maybe mercy now means peace later. That is what I choose to believe. Clara walked beside him in silence. She was thinking about the bacon breakfast, about the antibiotics, about Dr. Bennett's careful examinations, about Crawford's brother dying on a French beach, about the choice to show kindness to the people whose army had killed his brother. In that moment, Clara understood something that changed everything. Germany had been cruel because it was weak, desperate, afraid. Germany had tortured and killed and committed atrocities because it was fighting from a place of fear and insufficient strength. America could afford to be kind because it was strong, secure, confident. Mercy was not weakness. Mercy was the ultimate demonstration of power. Only the truly strong could choose to heal instead of hurt, to build instead of destroy, to show compassion instead of cruelty. The propaganda had taught her that strength meant domination, that power meant crushing your enemies, that victory meant making others suffer. But Crawford and Dr. Bennett, and even the bacon breakfast, were teaching her something different. That real strength meant having the power to destroy, but choosing not to. That real power meant being secure enough to be generous. That real victory meant turning enemies into something else. Maybe not friends, not yet, but at least human beings who could see each other as human. That night in the barracks, Clara wrote in a small journal she had started keeping. She wrote about the breakfast, about her sister's letter, about Crawford's brother. She wrote, I feel like I am two different people now. Part of me is still Clara Schneider from Hamburg, who wants to go home, who loves Germany, who grieves for everything we have lost. But part of me has changed. Part of me understands that we were lied to, not just about the Americans, about what strength means, about what civilization means, about what it means to be human in a world that tries to make us into monsters. The medicine in her pocket felt heavier than it should. It was saving her life, but it could not save her sister. And that truth, that impossible, unfair truth, was teaching her something about mercy that she would carry for the rest of her life. Sometimes kindness cannot solve everything. Sometimes the rules that protect many cause suffering for individuals. Sometimes you can hold the cure in your hand and still be helpless. But even then, even in that helplessness, the choice to show mercy mattered. The choice to see others as human mattered. The choice to break the cycle of cruelty mattered, even when it could not fix everything, even when it came too late for some people you loved. Clara did not know if Annalise would survive. She did not know if she would ever see her family again. She did not know what would happen when the war finally ended and she returned to whatever remained of Germany. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would remember this. The bacon breakfast, the antibiotics, Crawford's story, Dr. Bennett's care. She would remember that enemies had shown her mercy when her own country had none left to give. And somehow that memory would have to be enough to build something new from the ruins of everything that had been destroyed. The days after the bacon breakfast brought a tension that had not existed before. The women could no longer pretend that their captivity was simple. They could no longer tell themselves comfortable lies about American cruelty justifying their own nation's actions. The abundance they had witnessed, the medicine they had received, the kindness they had been shown, all of it created a crack in the foundation of everything they had believed. That crack became a fracture when Christina Muller finally spoke. It was evening in the barracks, that quiet time after dinner, when women gathered in small groups to talk or write letters or simply sit with their own thoughts. Christina had been mostly silent since their arrival at Camp Clinton, watching everything with hard eyes, her face revealing nothing. But that evening she stood up and her voice cut through the quiet conversations. You are all becoming traitors. The word fell like a stone into water. Conversation stopped. Women turned to look at her. Christina's face was set in lines of anger and something else. Desperation, perhaps. The look of someone watching their entire worldview crumble and fighting to hold on to the pieces. Taking enemy medicine while German civilians die, Christina continued. Her voice shook slightly but remained strong. Eating enemy bacon while German children starve. Growing fat and healthy while the fatherland burns. You laugh at breakfast. You smile at the American doctors. You are forgetting who you are. You are forgetting your duty. Some women looked down at their hands, guilt flooding through them again. Others met Christina's gaze with confusion or defiance. Clara felt her heart beating faster. She understood what Christina was doing. Christina was trying to rebuild the walls that the Americans had torn down, trying to restore the certainty that made suffering bearable. We should refuse treatment, Christina said. Show loyalty to the Reich. Show that we are still German, still faithful, still willing to sacrifice. Our people are dying. We should die too, if that is what honor demands. The words hung in the air. Clara found herself standing before she realized she was going to speak. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. Which Germany are we supposed to be loyal to? Christina turned to her sharply. What? Clara took a breath. Which Germany? The Germany that promised to protect us and left us to die. The Germany that told us Americans would torture us. But Americans are the ones keeping us alive. The Germany that said we were fighting for civilization but our own people have no medicine, while prisoners get antibiotics. You sound like Allied propaganda, Christina shot back. Or maybe Clara said quietly the propaganda was what we heard back home. Maybe we were lied to about more than just the Americans. Maybe we were lied to about everything. The silence that followed was heavy. Clara could feel eyes on her women processing what she had said, weighing it against their own experiences, their own observations. She pressed on. I was a nurse. I took an oath to heal people. In Germany, toward the end, there was no healing, only suffering, only death. I watched boys die from infections that medicine could have cured, but we had no medicine. I watched doctors perform surgery without anesthesia because we had nothing left. Her voice broke slightly. Here, enemy doctors give me antibiotics. They monitor my progress. They treat me with more care than German military hospitals gave to our own soldiers. Our own country had nothing. These enemies have everything. What does that tell us about who we were serving? Christina's face had gone white. That is not true. Germany was strong. Germany was fighting against overwhelming odds. The betrayal came from within, from those who lost faith. Clara shook her head. I have a letter from my mother. My sister is dying from pneumonia, the same infection I just recovered from. I have the medicine that could save her, and I cannot send it. My sister will die while I live. Not because the Americans are cruel, but because the war Germany started has destroyed everything, including our ability to help our own families. She pulled out the letter, held it up. This is what our country has become. People living in cellars, children starving, doctors with no medicine. And you want us to refuse treatment here? To die for what? For a Reich that already fell, for leaders who fled while cities burned, for a Germany that no longer exists. Christina's hands were shaking. You are wrong. You are all wrong. Germany will rise again. We will rebuild. We will remember who stood firm and who betrayed us. But her voice lacked conviction. Even she could hear the desperation in her own words. Three other women who had been nodding along with Christina's earlier speech now looked uncertain. One of the other women who had worked in the propaganda ministry spoke up quietly. My daughter wrote that they are burning furniture to stay warm, breaking apart tables and chairs because there is no coal, no wood, nothing. She is 7 years old. She asked me why the Führer promised we would win, but we are losing everything. What do I tell her when I go home? That we should have kept fighting, that she should be proud. We stayed loyal even while she froze and starved. The question hung unanswered. Christina looked around at the other women seeking support, seeking someone who would stand with her in maintaining the old certainties. She found only uncertain faces and averted eyes. Slowly, she sat back down. She did not speak again that evening, but Clara saw her shoulders shaking slightly, saw her hands gripping her knees. Everything Christina had believed in, everything she had built her identity around was collapsing. And Clara understood that pain because she felt it too. The difference was that Clara had decided to let it collapse, to face whatever came after. Christina was still fighting to hold on to rubble. 2 weeks later in late April, another letter arrived for Clara. She knew before opening it, knew from the way her hands started shaking when she saw her mother's handwriting, knew from the heaviness in her chest that made breathing difficult. My dearest Clara, by the time you read this, your sister Annalise is gone. The words blurred. Clara blinked and forced herself to focus to read each word, even though each word was a knife. The pneumonia took her on April 18th. She was unconscious at the end, which the doctor said was a mercy. She called for you in her fever dreams. She wanted you to know she was not afraid. We buried her in the rubble behind St. Michael's Church. There was no coffin. We wrapped her in the only blanket we had left. She was 22 years old. I do not blame you, Clara. You are a prisoner. You could not help her. But I needed you to know. She is at peace now. Your loving mother. Clara read the letter 3 times before the meaning fully penetrated. Annalise was dead. Her little sister, who used to steal extra bacon from the breakfast table, who had wanted to be a teacher, who had written letters full of hopes about what she would do after the war, was dead. Dead from an infection that antibiotics could have cured. The same antibiotics that had saved Clara's life. The same antibiotics that sat in the medical building here in Mississippi, available and abundant and useless. She looked down at her own body. Healthy, strong, well-fed. She had gained weight since arriving at Camp Clinton. Her dress fit tighter now. Her face had filled out. She could feel muscle returning to arms that had grown thin during the war's final desperate months. Every morning she woke up rested. Every night she slept through without coughing. Her body was healing, thriving, even while Annalise had died in a cellar in Hamburg. The unfairness of it was crushing. Clara had survived because she was a prisoner. Annalise had died because she was free. The Americans had saved Clara's life. Germany had let Annalise die. These facts could not be reconciled with any understanding of the world that made sense. Maria found Clara sitting on her bunk, staring at the letter but no longer seeing it. Maria sat down beside her, said nothing at first, just sat close enough that their shoulders touched. Finally, she spoke quietly. Your sister Clara nodded, could not speak, did not trust her voice. I'm sorry. The words were inadequate but sincere. They sat together in silence. After a while, other women came over. Sophie brought a cup of water. Ingrid squeezed Clara's hand. Even Christina approached her face, showing genuine sympathy, the first softness Clara had seen in her expression since their confrontation. When Dr. Rodriguez found Clara during that afternoon's medical appointment, she saw immediately that something had changed. She asked gently what was wrong, and Clara handed her the letter. Rodriguez read it, her face tightening with sympathy. I am so sorry for your loss. She spoke carefully, waiting for Sergeant Crawford to translate, though Clara's English had improved enough that she understood most of it directly. Your sister's death is a tragedy, but your survival is not a betrayal. Clara shook her head. I have medicine. I had the cure. I had it right here. Rodriguez knelt down so she was eye level with Clara. Listen to me. Your suffering will not help your family. If you refuse to eat, you will become sick again, but your sister will not become healthy. If you refuse treatment, you will suffer, but your mother will not suffer less. The best way to honor your sister is to live, to stay healthy, to be ready to help others when you can return home, to carry forward the healing she never got to receive. The logic was sound, but logic could not touch the grief. Clara nodded because Rodriguez needed her to nod, but inside she felt hollow. Her sister was dead. The war had killed her as surely as if she had died in a bombing raid, and Clara had survived by becoming a prisoner of the enemy. 3 days after Clara received the news about Annalise, word reached Camp Clinton that Germany had surrendered. May 8, 1945. Victory in Europe Day. The war was over. The Reich had fallen. Total defeat, unconditional surrender. Everything the propaganda had promised would never happen had happened. The women gathered in the barracks that evening in stunned silence. They had known Germany was losing. The letters from home had made that clear. But knowing and accepting are different things. The final confirmation that everything they had fought for, worked for, believed in had ended not in glorious victory, but in absolute defeat was almost too large to comprehend. Some women cried, some sat in numb silence. Some actually laughed, a slightly hysterical sound that came from emotional overload. The war was over. They had survived. But what had they survived for? What remained? Christina broke down completely. It was all for nothing, she said through tears. Every sacrifice, every hardship, every person who died, all of it for nothing. Clara found herself sitting beside Christina, putting an arm around the older woman's shoulders. Perhaps not for nothing. Perhaps we learned something here that Germany needed to learn. What Christina's voice was bitter. That we were wrong about everything. That strength is not about crushing your enemies. That real power means choosing mercy when you could choose cruelty. That the side with more bacon and eggs and antibiotics, the side with so much abundance, they can afford to be kind, that side was always going to win. Christina looked at her. And what do we do with that knowledge? We carry it home, Clara said. We teach it to whoever is left. We build something new. That night, no one enforced the divisions that had existed in the barracks. Christina's small group of holdouts quietly rejoined the larger community. They had all lost the same thing. They all faced the same uncertain future. The differences that had seemed so important now seemed petty. Germany had fallen. They were prisoners in a foreign land, and eventually they would have to return home to whatever remained. The weeks after Germany's surrender brought new anxieties. In June, the camp commander announced that prisoners would be repatriated. Ships would begin taking them back to Europe by autumn. They could finally go home. The announcement brought reactions that shamed many of the women. They wanted to go home. Of course they wanted to go home. They wanted to see their families, or what remained of them. They wanted to know who had survived. They wanted to help rebuild. But underneath the longing was something else. Something they did not want to admit even to themselves. Fear. Fear of leaving the safety of Camp Clinton. Fear of returning to a country in ruins. Fear of facing starvation and cold and chaos again after months of regular meals and warm beds and medical care. They had grown used to abundance, to clean water and electric lights and doctors who had medicine. Returning to Germany meant returning to a place that had none of those things. Sophie voiced what others were thinking during one evening's quiet conversation. I want to go home, but I am afraid to leave here. The admission was shameful but honest. Several other women nodded. They had been prisoners for months, but their captivity had been easier than freedom would be. That realization was devastating. What kind of Germans were they preferring enemy imprisonment to freedom in their own country? But the feelings were real, based on legitimate fears, based on letters describing conditions that kept getting worse, not better, based on understanding that the Germany they would return to bore no resemblance to the Germany they had left. Clara wrote in her journal, "Something inside me has split in two, though not cleanly. Part of me remains Clara Schneider, the German nurse from Hamburg, who wants nothing more than to go home to whatever remains of my family. But another part has been fundamentally altered by what I have witnessed here. I have seen what peace looks like when a nation has abundance instead of scarcity, what it means to have enough food, enough medicine, enough of everything. I have seen how enemies can choose to treat each other with dignity, even when they have every reason not to. How can I return to Germany without carrying these memories? And what will I do with them when I get there? In October, 7 months after that first terrifying morning outside the medical building, Clara was called for a final examination. Ships would be leaving within 2 weeks. Dr. Bennett wanted to ensure all the women were healthy enough for the journey home. Clara walked to the white building one last time. The building that had terrified her that first morning. The building that had become familiar through daily visits. The building where she had learned that enemies could show mercy. Dr. Bennett conducted a thorough examination just as he had done every time before. He listened to her lungs with the stethoscope, moving it carefully across her back and chest. When he finished, he sat back and smiled. Your lungs are completely clear. No sign of any infection. Your weight is healthy. Your blood pressure is normal. From a medical standpoint, you are in excellent health. Clara felt tears in her eyes. Thank you for everything. You saved my life. Bennett's smile faded into something more serious. Clara, you were a nurse in Germany. You understand medicine. You know what it means to heal people. When you return home, Germany is going to need nurses desperately. They will need people who understand not just how to treat illness, but how to treat patients with dignity and care. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I hope you will use what you learned here. Not just the medical knowledge, but the understanding that every patient, regardless of who they are, where they come from, what they believe, deserves to be treated as a human being worthy of healing. His voice carried weight. Medicine is not just about curing disease. It is about affirming human dignity. That is what I tried to show you here. That even in war, even with enemies, that dignity must be preserved. Because if we lose that, if we stop seeing each other as human, then we lose what makes us worth saving. Clara promised. I will remember. I will never forget what you did for us here, and I will teach it to others. Bennett reached into his desk and pulled out a small packet. Antibiotic pills, extra ones beyond what regulations strictly allowed. For your journey, he said quietly, in case you need them. Clara took the packet, knowing she would probably give the pills to someone else who needed them more. The gesture mattered more than the medicine. It was Bennett's way of saying that mercy extended beyond regulations, beyond what was required, into the realm of what was simply human. We are coming to the end of Clara's time in Mississippi, but her story does not end here. What happened next when she returned to the ruins of Hamburg would prove whether the lessons she learned could survive in the real world. Before we continue, I want to ask you something. Which traditional American values do you think are most important to preserve today? Is it the belief that even enemies deserve dignity? The idea that mercy can be a form of strength? Or the simple act of treating every person as a human being? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you have been moved by Clara's story, please share this video. These are the stories that define what America truly is. Not just a military superpower, but a nation that believes in human dignity even in the darkest times. The ship that carried Clara and the other women back to Europe was different from the one that had brought them to America. They traveled as repatriated prisoners, not as defeated soldiers being shipped to an unknown fate. They knew what awaited them: devastation, hunger, the massive task of rebuilding. But they also carried something unexpected. They carried memories of how enemies had treated them with kindness. They carried knowledge that even in war, humanity could survive. They carried understanding that mercy could be a form of strength rather than weakness. These were lessons that Germany would desperately need in the years to come. Clara stood on the deck as the ship approached the German coast, the same coast she had left 10 months earlier. But she was not the same person who had departed. That person had been shaped entirely by Nazi propaganda and wartime fear. This person had been transformed by unexpected kindness from unexpected sources. The ship docked at Bremerhaven. The port was damaged but functional, cleared of debris by Allied occupation forces. The women disembarked slowly, uncertain, afraid of what they would find. The train journey to Hamburg took twice as long as it should have because the railways were damaged, because bridges were down, because everything that had made Germany function had been broken. Hamburg was unrecognizable. Clara had seen photographs, had read descriptions and letters, but nothing prepared her for the reality. Entire neighborhoods reduced to rubble. Buildings that had stood for centuries now just piles of brick and shattered stone. Streets cleared just enough for single-file walking. People thin and hollow-eyed, moving slowly like ghosts through the ruins of their own city. Clara found her mother living in the cellar of what had been their house. The house itself was gone collapsed during a bombing raid 2 years earlier. The cellar had one-room walls of bare concrete, no electricity, no heat except what could be generated by burning whatever wood they could find. Her mother had aged 10 years, thin to the point of frailty, hands that shook with weakness, but alive. She stood when Clara climbed down the crude stairs and they held each other without speaking. Some things were too large for words. Eventually her mother spoke. Anneliese is gone. Your brother Friedrich is still missing, presumed dead. Your father we buried in 1943. But you are here. You survived. The reunion was joy and grief tangled together until they could not be separated. Clara told her mother about Camp Clinton, about the medical care, about the bacon breakfast, about everything. Her mother listened with an expression Clara could not read. Confusion, perhaps, or simply exhaustion, too deep to process new information. That first evening, Clara noticed her mother favoring her right hand. She asked to see it. Her mother resisted, but Clara insisted, using her nurse's authority. The hand had an infected cut, minor but neglected. Without treatment, it could become serious, could lead to blood poisoning. In the chaos of post-war, Hamburg people died from infected cuts all the time. Clara boiled water carefully using precious fuel. She cleaned the wound properly the way Dr. Bennett and Dr. Rodriguez had taught her. She bandaged it with strips of clean cloth, changing the dressing daily. She watched for signs of infection, monitoring it with the same careful attention the American doctors had shown monitoring her lung infection. Where did you learn this? Her mother asked, watching Clara work with professional efficiency. From American doctors, in the prison camp. Her mother looked confused. But they were the enemy. Yes, Clara said quietly. They were. And they taught me what medicine is supposed to be. Within a week, Clara had found work at a makeshift hospital operating out of a damaged school building. The hospital had minimal supplies, no electricity, barely functioning water. But they had patients more than they could help. People injured in the bombings. People sick from malnutrition and exposure. Children with diseases that medicine could prevent, but they had no medicine. Clara brought something the other nurses did not have. Standards, techniques, an understanding of how medicine should be practiced even when you had almost nothing to work with. She insisted on washing hands between patients even when water was scarce. She kept careful records even when paper was precious. She treated every patient with the same dignity and care, regardless of who they were or what they had done during the war. The other nurses noticed. One asked, "Where did you learn to work like this?" From the enemy, Clara said. They taught me what we forgot. The real test came 3 weeks after her return. A man was brought to the hospital wounded and feverish. Someone recognized him. A former Nazi official, one who had been responsible for labor conscriptions, for sending people to work camps, for enforcing policies that had caused suffering and death. The other hospital staff wanted to turn him away. Let him suffer like he made others suffer, one nurse said. He deserves to die. Clara looked at the man. He was maybe 50, unconscious from fever, his wound infected and serious. She thought about Dr. Bennett, saying, "When I look at you, I do not see an enemy. I see a patient who needs care." She began treating him, cleaning the wound, using the last of the antiseptic they had, monitoring his fever. The other nurses watched her with expressions ranging from confusion to anger. Why, one of them finally asked, "Why treat him with the same care you give to everyone else? He does not deserve kindness." Clara kept working as she spoke, because I learned something in America that Germany forgot. Healing is not about who deserves it. Healing is about affirming that every person, no matter who they are or what they have done, is still a human being. The moment you stop treating people as human, you become the monster you are fighting against. She looked up at them. I held my sister's hand in my mind as she died from an infection I recovered from because American doctors gave me medicine. They gave it to me even though I was their enemy, even though German soldiers had killed their brothers and sons. They chose mercy. I can do no less. The official survived. When he regained consciousness days later and understood that Clara had saved his life, he asked why. She told him the same thing she had told the other nurses. His face showed something then. Not quite remorse, not quite understanding, but perhaps the beginning of both. Years passed, Germany slowly rebuilt. The economic miracle, they called it, though it felt more like exhausted people doing what needed to be done because there was no other choice. Clara continued working as a nurse, eventually becoming head nurse at a rebuilt Hamburg hospital. She trained new nurses, young women who had been children during the war, who had only fragmentary memories of the destruction. One day in the mid-1960s, a young nurse asked her a question. Frau Schneider, why do you insist we treat every patient with such care? Even the difficult ones, even the ones who are rude or cruel. Clara looked at the young woman. She was 22, the same age Annalisa had been when she died. Her name tag read Annalise Fisher, named after an aunt who had died in the war her parents had told her. Clara asked the young nurses to gather around. She told them the story about standing outside a white building in Mississippi in March 1945, about being told to close her eyes and not scream, about expecting torture and receiving healing instead, about bacon and eggs and antibiotics in Dr. Bennett's careful care. I thought I was about to be tortured, she said. I thought I was about to die. Instead, a doctor gave me medicine that saved my life. An enemy showed me mercy when my own country had none to give. And I learned something that day that I want you to understand. She looked at each of the young nurses. Medicine is not about curing diseases. Medicine is about affirming human dignity. Every patient you treat, whether they are kind or cruel, whether they are friend or enemy, whether they deserve your care or not, every patient is a human being. And the moment you forget that, you stop being a healer. The young nurse named Annalise asked quietly, "Did your sister, the one I was named for, did she get that kind of care?" Clara shook her head. No, she died because Germany had nothing left. No medicine, no mercy, no humanity. She died from the same infection I recovered from. And I survived because enemies treated me better than my own country treated its citizens. She paused. This is how your namesake lives on. Not just in memory, but in action. In every nurse who learns to see patients as human beings. In every doctor who chooses mercy over judgment. In every person who breaks the cycle of cruelty by showing kindness they were not shown. This is how we honor the dead, by being better than what killed them. In the 1970s, Clara was invited to give a lecture at a medical school in the United States. She accepted. The journey back across the Atlantic brought memories flooding back. She was in her 50s now, her hair graying her body showing the weight of years. But she was alive, healthy, still working, still teaching, still carrying forward the lessons learned in a Mississippi prison camp 3 decades earlier. She found Dr. Bennett. He was retired now, living in a small house near the hospital where he had worked. When Clara knocked on his door, he opened it and stared at her for a moment before recognition dawned. Clara Schneider. They sat in his living room and talked for hours about what had happened after the war, about the hospital work, about the nurses she had trained, about the Germany that had rebuilt itself from ruins, about whether the mercy shown in 1945 had made any difference in the world that followed. Did you remember what I taught you? Bennett asked. Every single day, Clara said, and I taught it to hundreds of others. The antibiotics cured my lungs. But what you really healed was my understanding of what it means to be human. Bennett smiled. That is what America is supposed to be, Clara. Not just military power or economic might. It is the belief that even in war, even with enemies, human dignity must be preserved. Because if we lose that, if we become cruel, just because we have the power to be cruel, then we lose what makes us worth fighting for. They talked until evening. When Clara left, she carried with her a sense of completion. A circle closed. The terrified young woman who had stood outside a white building, expecting death, had become a woman who spent her life teaching others to choose healing over harm. The lesson had taken root, had grown, had spread. For Clara Schneider and the other German women prisoners at Camp Clinton, the command to close your eyes and not scream became the moment before a revelation. They closed their eyes, expecting the worst of humanity. They opened them to discover the best. The antibiotics healed their bodies. The food nourished them back to health. But it was the simple act of being treated with dignity, even as prisoners, even as enemies, that healed something deeper. It healed their ability to see others as human. And once you see someone as human, everything changes. That breakfast of bacon and eggs was more than just a meal. It was proof that American abundance was real, that American values were real, that mercy could be stronger than revenge. In the ruins of post-war Germany, Clara carried those lessons forward. She taught a new generation that healing is about more than curing disease. It is about affirming the worth of every human life. The greatest weapon in that war was not bombs or bullets. It was the simple act of treating prisoners with dignity, because kindness broke through hatred in a way cruelty never could. If you were moved by Clara's story, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. We bring you true stories from World War II that reveal the incredible power of human compassion, even in history's darkest hours. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story that reminds us what we are capable of at our best. And remember this: the strength of a nation is not measured by its ability to destroy its enemies. It is measured by its willingness to show mercy even when it has the power to destroy. That is what makes America truly great. That is the lesson Clara Schneider carried from a Mississippi prison camp to the hospitals of Hamburg. That is the lesson we must never forget.